I demanded a DNA test for my newborn daughter. My wife kicked me out on the spot. 6 weeks later, I returned with the results, and her face told me everything I needed to know. What I discovered destroyed my family forever. Well, my name is Marcus, and I'm 36 years old. For the last 7 years, I thought I had it all figured out. I'd been with my wife, Elena, since we met at a mutual friend's barbecue back in the summer. We got married after dating for 2.5 years, and honestly, those early years felt like something out of a movie. We lived in a comfortable two-bedroom apartment in Portland. Both of us had stable careers, and we were building what I thought was an unshakable foundation. Our son Oliver came into the world when I was 31. The moment I held him in the hospital, something shifted inside me. This tiny human with my dark eyes and the same cowlick I'd had since childhood looked up at me, and I knew my life had found its purpose. Oliver was my mirror image. Everyone said so. My mother would hold him and laugh, saying it was like traveling back in time to when I was a baby. 3 years later, Elena got pregnant again. We'd been trying for a while, wanting Oliver to have a sibling close in age. When we found out it was a girl, I was over the moon. I imagined tea parties and teaching her to ride a bike, walking her down the aisle one day. We named her before she was even born, Isabella. Isabella arrived in early September, just as the leaves started changing colors. The delivery went smoothly, and Elena seemed happy, exhausted but glowing in that way new mothers do. But when the nurse placed Isabella in my arms for the first time, something felt different. Her hair was bright red, not auburn, not strawberry blonde, but vivid, almost copper-colored red that caught the fluorescent hospital lights like fire. At first, I didn't think much of it. Babies surprise you, right? Genetics are complicated, mysterious even. But as the days turned into weeks and Isabella's hair only got brighter, more distinctly red, a small voice in the back of my mind started whispering questions I didn't want to acknowledge. I have jet black hair, thick and straight. Elena's hair is a light brown, almost dirty blonde in the summer sun. Oliver inherited my coloring completely. So where did this bright red hair come from? I tried to push it away. I told myself I was being paranoid, that there must be some distant relative on one side of the family or the other. But late at night, while Elena nursed Isabella in the dim glow of the nursery lamp, I'd find myself on my phone, searching red hair inheritance genetics and recessive gene probability. What I learned made my stomach turn. Red hair is one of the most recessive traits there is. Both parents need to carry the gene for it to appear in a child. I started mentally cataloging every family member I could remember. My side was a sea of dark browns and blacks, going back to my grandparents and beyond. Elena had once told me, years ago during some random conversation, that her entire family was brunette and blonde. Boring hair colors, she'd joked. No redheads anywhere. The math wasn't adding up. But it wasn't just Isabella's appearance that was eating at me. Elena had changed. In those first few weeks after Isabella's birth, my wife became someone I barely recognized. She was distant, cold even. Whenever I tried to talk to her about anything more substantial than what we needed from the grocery store, she'd find a reason to leave the room. Oliver needed something. Isabella was fussing. She had a headache. She was too tired. And her phone. God, her phone. Elena had always been on her phone a decent amount, sure, but now it was constant. She'd be scrolling through messages with this intense focus, and the moment I walked into the room, she'd flip it over or switch apps so quickly it seemed practiced. When I'd ask who she was texting, she'd say it was work stuff or mom group chats, but her voice had this edge to it, defensive and sharp. The breaking point came about 3 weeks after Isabella was born. It was past midnight, and I couldn't sleep. The anxiety had been building for days, sitting on my chest like a weight. I went downstairs to the kitchen for water, and that's when I saw it. Elena's laptop sitting open on the counter, screen still glowing. She must have been looking at something before bed and forgotten to close it. I stood there for a moment, having an internal war with myself. Looking at someone's private messages is a violation of trust, I knew that. But the way she'd been acting, the secrets, the distance, something was wrong, and I needed to know. I moved closer. Facebook Messenger was open, and I could see a conversation thread with someone named Derek. My hands started trembling before I even started reading. Most of the recent messages were innocuous. Most of the recent messages were innocuous. Work projects, meeting schedules, client feedback. They were colleagues at her digital marketing agency. But I scrolled up, going back further, and that's when I saw it. Messages from about 13 or 14 months ago, right around the time Elena would have conceived Isabella. The messages weren't explicitly sexual, nothing that screamed affair in bold letters, but they were inappropriate, flirty jokes, inside references, late-night texts that had no business being sent between married coworkers. "Missing your face today," one from him said. "Next time we grab drinks, it's on me," Elena had replied with a winking emoji. My vision blurred. I closed the laptop carefully like it might explode and walked back upstairs in a daze. I lay next to my sleeping wife, staring at the ceiling as the room slowly filled with dawn light, my mind racing through every possibility, every explanation, every excuse. The next day I started paying attention, really paying attention. I went through Elena's social media profiles, scrolling back through months of photos. There were dozens of pictures from work events, company happy hours, team building retreats. And in so many of them, there he was, Derek, tall, maybe 6'2", with a broad smile and a distinctive feature that made my blood run cold. Bright red hair and a matching beard, the exact same shade as Isabella's. In one photo from a holiday party, dated last December, Derek had his arm casually draped around Elena's shoulders. She was laughing at something, her head tilted toward him in a way that looked too comfortable, too familiar. That party would have been around the time Isabella was conceived. I showed the photos to my best friend Tyler one afternoon when I needed someone, anyone, to tell me I was crazy. We sat in his garage while he worked on his motorcycle, and I scrolled through the images on my phone. "Look, man," Tyler said carefully, wiping grease off his hands. "Coworkers take pictures together all the time. It doesn't mean anything." But I could see it in his face. That flicker of doubt, the way his eyes kept going back to Derek's red hair, and then to my phone's home screen, where my wallpaper was a photo of Isabella. "You need to talk to Elena," he said finally. "Just sit her down. Tell her what you're feeling. Communication, right? That's what they always say." I wanted to, I tried, but every time I worked up the courage to bring up anything serious, Elena would deflect or shut down completely. It was like she knew what I wanted to discuss and was determined not to let me get there. October came, and Isabella was about 6 weeks old. The thoughts had consumed me to the point where I could barely function. I was working from home that week, trying to balance conference calls with taking care of Oliver, who'd been sent home from preschool with a cold. My phone had died during a particularly long video meeting, and I needed to take a photo of Isabella to send to my mom, who'd been asking for updated pictures every single day. So I grabbed Elena's phone from the kitchen counter, where she'd left it while putting Isabella down for a nap. I wasn't snooping. Not intentionally, anyway. But when I unlocked it with the passcode I'd known for years, the screen opened directly to her text messages, and right there at the top was a recent message from Derek. "Can't wait to meet her properly soon." Meet her properly. The words repeated in my mind like a broken record. Why would my wife's coworker need to meet my infant daughter properly? What did that even mean? Unless he believed she was more than just my daughter. Unless he thought Isabella was his. I took a screenshot before I could stop myself, texted it to my own phone, then deleted all evidence of what I'd done. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped Elena's phone twice. That evening, after both kids were asleep, I couldn't hold it in anymore. Elena was in the living room, folding laundry and half watching some reality show, and I just stood there in the doorway, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. "I want a paternity test for Isabella," I said. No preamble, no build-up, just the truth. Elena froze mid-fold, a tiny pink onesie clutched in her hands. Her face went through a series of expressions so quickly I could barely track them. Confusion, shock, anger, and then something that looked a lot like fear. "What did you just say?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. "You heard me. I want a paternity test. For Isabella." "How could you?" She stood up, the laundry basket tumbling over, baby clothes spilling across the floor. "How could you even suggest something like that? After everything we've been through, after 7 years together, You're going to accuse me of... I'm not accusing you of anything, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. I'm asking for a test. If there's nothing to hide, then it should be easy to prove me wrong. That's when I pulled up the screenshot on my phone and showed it to her. Derek's message, clear as day. The color drained from Elena's face. She went from red with anger to white as a sheet in seconds. That's not what you think, she stammered, but she wouldn't meet my eyes. He's just being friendly. Everyone at work has seen Isabella's photos, and he was just saying, meet her properly, I interrupted. Why does he need to meet our daughter properly, Elena? Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. The silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. If you don't trust me after all these years, she finally said, her voice rising to a shout, then you need to leave. Get out. Get out of this apartment right now. She was pointing at the door, her hands shaking, tears streaming down her face. But behind the tears, I could see something else. Guilt, fear, the look of someone who'd been caught. So I did what she asked. I packed a bag while she stood in the hallway, her arms crossed, watching me like I was a stranger. I went into Oliver's room, kissed his forehead while he slept, whispered that Daddy loved him. Then I stopped at Isabella's crib, looked down at her peaceful sleeping face, that bright red hair catching the glow from her nightlight, and wondered if I'd ever know the truth. I drove to Tyler's apartment at 1 a.m, my entire world collapsing around me. The next morning, sitting on Tyler's couch and running on maybe 2 hours of sleep, I ordered a paternity test kit from Amazon, paid extra for overnight shipping because waiting even one more day felt impossible. The kit arrived the next afternoon in a discreet white box. I swabbed the inside of my cheek that evening, sealed it in the envelope provided, and stored it in my backpack. Now I just needed Isabella's sample. I knew Elena's schedule by heart after years of coordinating our lives. She had a major client presentation scheduled for that Thursday, something she'd been stressing about for weeks. She'd mentioned she was leaving Isabella with our neighbor, Mrs. Park, for a few hours since the daycare didn't accept infants under 3 months old. Thursday morning, I called in sick to work, then drove to our apartment building. I parked down the street and waited, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I watched Elena leave at 9:30, her professional blazer on, laptop bag over her shoulder. I waited another 15 minutes to make sure she wasn't coming back for anything she'd forgotten. Mrs. Park seemed surprised when she opened the door and saw me standing there. Marcus, I didn't know you were stopping by today. I gave her a rehearsed excuse about needing to grab some important documents from my home office, some work emergency that couldn't wait. She let me in without question. Why wouldn't she? I lived there, or used to. Isabella was asleep in her portable bassinet in the living room, that shock of red hair visible even from across the room. Mrs. Park went to the kitchen to make herself tea, and I made a show of walking to my office, shuffling some random papers into a folder. Then I walked over to the bassinet, my daughter, or maybe not my daughter, this tiny human who had done nothing wrong, who was innocent in all of this, sleeping peacefully without any idea that her father was about to change everything. I pulled out the swab from my pocket, my hands trembling, and gently rubbed it against the inside of Isabella's cheek. She stirred slightly, made a small sound, but didn't wake. I sealed the swab in the envelope, shoved it in my jacket pocket, and left as quickly as I could without raising suspicion. That afternoon, I mailed both samples to the lab. The website said results would take 4 to 6 weeks. Now all I could do was wait. Those 6 weeks were the longest of my entire life. Living on Tyler's couch, I became a shell of who I used to be. I'd wake up at dawn, immediately check my email, find nothing, and then spend the rest of the day going through the motions of being a functional adult. Work was a disaster. I couldn't focus on anything. My boss, a generally understanding guy, pulled me aside twice to ask if everything was okay. What was I supposed to tell him? That I was waiting to find out if my 2-month-old daughter was actually mine? That my marriage was disintegrating? I mumbled something about personal issues, and he backed off, but I could see the concern in his eyes. Elena started texting me again around week 3, but only about Oliver. She'd send photos of him at the park, videos of him singing his favorite songs, pictures of him eating breakfast with syrup all over his face, but never any mention of Isabella. never asking how I was doing, if I was okay, where I was staying. It was like she was punishing me with silence and selective communication. I asked if I could come see Oliver. She said only if I apologized for the accusation and dropped the paternity test. I told her I'd already sent the samples. There was no going back. She stopped responding after that. Tyler tried his best to keep me sane. We'd stay up late, drinking beer and talking in circles. He'd tell me that maybe there was some genetic explanation I didn't understand, some dormant gene from generations back. But even he couldn't hide the doubt in his voice. One night, about a month in, he asked me the question I'd been avoiding. What are you going to do if the test comes back saying Isabella's yours? I didn't have an answer. Could I go back to Elena after everything? The messages, the lies, the distance? Could I forgive this, move forward, pretend none of it happened? Probably not. And if the test came back negative, well, that was clear cut. I'd be done. Completely, utterly done. I started researching divorce lawyers, reading about custody laws in Oregon. I learned that the process typically takes at least 90 days of separation before you can even file, and the whole thing could drag on for 4 to 6 months. I bookmarked several law firms, made lists of questions, prepared for the worst. I also became obsessed with social media. I know it was unhealthy, but I couldn't stop myself. Elena posted photos of Oliver at his preschool's fall festival in early November. He was dressed as a little dinosaur, his favorite animal, and I should have been there. I should have been the one helping him with his costume, taking those photos. She posted pictures of Isabella too, sleeping peacefully, with captions like, "My perfect angel," and "So blessed to be her mama," with a string of heart emojis. The comments were full of friends saying how beautiful Isabella was, how much she looked like Elena. Some people asked where I was, why I wasn't in any recent photos. Elena never responded to those comments, but I noticed something that made my blood boil. Derek liked every single post about Isabella, every single one. Not the posts about Oliver, just the ones featuring Isabella. The pattern was obvious, deliberate. I wanted to comment something, to call him out publicly, but Tyler talked me down. "Don't make it worse, man. Wait for the results, then you'll know what to do." Week 5 came and went with no email. I called the lab, desperate for any information, and some customer service rep told me that during busy periods, results could take up to 8 weeks. I needed to be patient. Patient. I was losing my mind. I'd stopped sleeping more than a few hours a night, had barely any appetite, and had lost probably 15 pounds since leaving the apartment. My mom kept calling, asking why she hadn't seen the baby in weeks, why Elena wasn't returning her messages. I had to tell her something, so I admitted we were having marital problems and needed space. She wanted to come over immediately to fix everything like mothers always try to do, but I told her to stay away for now. It hurt her feelings, but I couldn't deal with her questions on top of everything else. Then finally, on a Tuesday morning in early December, 6 weeks and 4 days after I'd mailed those samples, I got the email. I was in a conference room at work, pretending to pay attention to a quarterly budget meeting, when my phone buzzed. I glanced down and saw the subject line, "DNA test results available." My heart stopped. Time seemed to freeze. I excused myself, said I needed to use the restroom, and basically ran to my car in the parking garage. I sat in the driver's seat, my hands shaking so badly I could barely unlock my phone. I opened the email, clicked the secure link, entered my password. The page loaded slowly, agonizingly slowly, and then there it was. Probability of paternity, 0.0% zero. The report went on with scientific explanations about genetic markers and alleles and statistical analysis, but I couldn't read any of it. That 0 was all I needed to see. 0 meant Isabella wasn't mine. 0 meant Elena had lied. 0 meant my entire life for the past 7 years had been built on a foundation that was crumbling beneath me. I sat in that car for at least 30 minutes, just staring at the screen, reading that 0 over and over again, like maybe if I looked enough times, it would change. But it never did. I drove straight to a law office downtown, one I'd researched during those long, sleepless nights. The receptionist said they were fully booked, but something about my face, the desperation I must have been wearing like a mask, made her pause. She talked to someone in the back, and they agreed to see me for a quick consultation. The attorney's name was Mrs. Chen, late 50s, with kind eyes but a no-nonsense demeanor that told me she'd seen everything. I showed her the DNA results on my phone, hands still trembling, and explained everything. She listened without interrupting, took notes, and then laid out my options in clear, straightforward terms. Filing for divorce in Oregon would take minimum 90 days, probably longer if Elena contested anything. Child support for Oliver would still be my responsibility, obviously, but Isabella wasn't legally mine, so I had no financial obligation to her. Mrs. Chen asked if I wanted to pursue custody of Oliver, and I said yes, as much as possible. She warned me that courts typically favor mothers, especially with young children. But we could fight for joint custody, maybe even primary if we played it right given the circumstances. I paid her retainer right there, $2,100 on my credit card that was already carrying too much debt. She said she'd draft the divorce papers and have copies of the official DNA results ready for me to pick up in 2 days. I needed Elena to see it, needed her to face what she'd done in black and white. 2 days later, on Thursday afternoon, I picked up 2 manila envelopes from Mrs. Chen's office. They felt heavier than they should have, like they carried the weight of my entire collapsed world inside them. Tyler offered to come with me to the apartment for moral support, but I told him this was something I needed to do alone. The drive across Portland felt surreal. I'd rehearsed what I was going to say 1,000 times, but now that the moment was here, my mind went completely blank. I parked in my old spot, the one I'd used for 3 years, and walked up to the second floor. I still had my key, but I knocked instead. It felt wrong to just walk in, like I was already a stranger to this place. Elena opened the door, Isabella in her arms, and the look on her face was complicated. Surprise, yes, but also something like resignation, as if she'd been waiting for this moment. "Can I come in?" I asked quietly. She stepped aside without speaking. The apartment looked exactly the same, but felt completely foreign, like I was visiting a museum of my old life. Oliver was on the living room floor, building something with his blocks, and when he saw me, his entire face transformed with joy. "Daddy!" he screamed, running over and wrapping his small arms around my legs. I picked him up, held him tight, breathing in that little kid's smell of shampoo and graham crackers, fighting back the tears that threatened to spill over. This was my son, my actual son, and I'd barely seen him in 6 weeks because of his mother's betrayal. I set Oliver back down, told him to keep playing while Mommy and Daddy talked. Elena sat on the couch with Isabella still in her arms, and I remained standing. I felt like sitting would make this too casual, too normal, and nothing about this was normal. I pulled out both envelopes from my jacket and placed them on the coffee table in front of her. "What is this?" she asked, her voice barely audible, though I think she already knew. "Open the first one." She shifted Isabella to one arm and picked up the envelope with her free hand. I watched her face as she read the DNA report, watched the color drain from her cheeks like someone had pulled a plug, watched her eyes fill with tears that spilled down her face and onto the paper, making the ink blur slightly. The document shook in her hand. "Marcus, I can explain," she started, but I cut her off. "There's nothing to explain. 0% paternity is pretty clear." The silence that followed felt like it lasted forever. Isabella started fussing, her small cries filling the space. But Elena just sat there frozen, not even attempting to comfort the baby. Finally, she spoke, and what came out was probably the most honest she'd been with me in over a year. "It happened once," she said, her voice breaking. "Just once. I swear to you, Marcus, it was one time." She told me it was at the company holiday party 15 months ago, back in November of the previous year. She'd had too much to drink. Derek had been flirting with her all night, paying her attention in a way that felt good after months of us being stuck in routine. They ended up in his car in the parking garage. "It was stupid and meaningless, and I regretted it the second it was over," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I thought it didn't matter because we were trying for another baby anyway. When I got pregnant a few weeks later, I convinced myself it was yours." I wanted it to be yours. She said she never told Derek, never confirmed anything with him, just let him wonder. But when Isabella was born with that unmistakable red hair, she knew. She knew, and she said nothing, just hoped I wouldn't notice or question it. I was going to tell you eventually, she sobbed. I swear I was. I just didn't know how. I didn't know when would be the right time. I asked her about the text message, the one about Derek wanting to meet Isabella properly. She admitted he'd been asking questions for months, getting increasingly suspicious and insistent. He wanted to meet his daughter. He wanted to be involved in her life. He's been pushing me to tell you the truth so he can be part of her life, Marcus. He wants to be her father. That somehow made it worse, knowing this man had been waiting in the wings the entire time, waiting for Elena to blow up our family so he could step in. Open the second envelope, I said, my voice cold and flat. She pulled out the divorce papers, and I watched her face crumble as she read through them. She looked at those papers like they were a death sentence, which in a way they were. The death of our marriage, our family, everything we'd spent 7 years building. Please don't do this, she begged. We can work this out. Counseling, therapy, we can start over. Please, Marcus. But I was done. Completely, emotionally, irrevocably done. My lawyer will be in touch about custody arrangements for Oliver. That's when she really panicked, her eyes going wide. What do you mean? What are you talking about? I explained calmly and clearly that I wanted primary custody of Oliver, that I'd already found a 2-bedroom apartment in the Pearl District, closer to my work, that I was prepared to fight for my son. She started screaming then, saying I couldn't take Oliver away from her, that he needed his mother, that no court would separate a child from his mom. I reminded her, my voice never rising, that she was the one who cheated. She was the one who lied for months. And no judge would look favorably on that kind of deception. Oliver looked up from his blocks, his small face confused and scared by the yelling. Come here, buddy, I said, kneeling down. Daddy has to go now, but I'll see you real soon, okay? He hugged me tight, and I felt his small body trembling. I miss you, Daddy, he whispered into my ear. That nearly broke me, nearly made me forget everything and want to stay just to be with him. But I couldn't. Not in this house, not with this woman, not with these lies. I stood up, looked at Elena one last time, and walked out. The next 4 months were brutal. Lawyers, mediation sessions, court dates, endless paperwork, and financial stress that kept me up at night. Elena fought me on everything at first, especially custody of Oliver. Her lawyer was aggressive, trying to paint me as the one who abandoned the family, who left a newborn and a toddler without support. But then something shifted around late January. Maybe she realized she couldn't win, not with the DNA results and the evidence of her infidelity. Or maybe she just felt guilty. Her lawyer reached out to Mrs. Chen with a settlement proposal. I would get primary custody of Oliver. Elena would have him every other weekend and 1 evening per week. I'd have no financial responsibility for Isabella whatsoever. We'd split our assets 50-50, which wasn't much, but it was fair. I agreed immediately. I didn't want to drag this out any longer than necessary. I just wanted my son and my freedom. The divorce was finalized in late March, about 5 months after I'd walked out. I'd already moved into my new apartment in the Pearl District back in February, a decent 2-bedroom place with a small balcony overlooking the street. Oliver got his own room, and I let him pick out new bedding with spaceships on it, his favorite thing at the time besides dinosaurs. The first few weeks of our new life were rough. Oliver kept asking why Mommy wasn't there, why he couldn't see baby Isabella every day. I tried to explain it in terms a 3-year-old could understand, told him that Mommy and Daddy loved him very much, but couldn't live together anymore. He seemed to accept it eventually the way kids do, adapting to their new reality with a resilience adults never quite manage. Through mutual friends and the awkward exchanges during pickups, when Elena would come to get Oliver for her weekends, I pieced together what was happening with her and Derek. Turns out Derek actually wanted to step up, wanted to be a father to Isabella. He'd been pressuring Elena for months to leave me and move in with him, even before I discovered the truth. After our divorce was finalized, Elena didn't really have a choice. She couldn't afford the old apartment on her own, not with a newborn and only her income. She couldn't handle everything without support. So she moved in with Derek in April, into his place in the Lloyd district. But anyone could see she wasn't happy. When she'd come to pick up Oliver, she looked exhausted, defeated, like she was carrying the weight of all her mistakes on her shoulders. Derek would sometimes be in the car waiting, and even from a distance I could see the tension between them, the way they didn't look at each other, the stiff body language. She'd traded one life for another and clearly regretted it. I heard through the grapevine from a former coworker of hers who I ran into at a coffee shop that Derek was controlling, constantly questioning where she went, who she talked to, checking her phone. Guess he didn't trust her after how their relationship had started. Ironic, really. Elena had made her bed, and now she had to lie in it, living with a man she didn't love, raising a baby that reminded her every single day of her biggest mistake. Oliver's visits with Elena became less frequent over time. At first, it was every other weekend, as the custody agreement specified, but then she started canceling. Isabella was sick. She had to work late. Something came up. By summer, it was down to maybe once or twice a month. When Oliver did come back from her place, he'd be quiet and withdrawn, and it would take him a day or two to return to normal. I never badmouthed Elena in front of him, never told him what really happened. That's not fair to a kid. But children pick up on things, on energy and tension and unhappiness. He started asking to stay home instead of going to mommy's house. What could I do? I couldn't force him to go if he didn't want to. So the visits became even more sporadic. Part of me felt bad for Elena, losing both her son and her old life. But then I'd remember the lies, the months of deception, the 6 weeks I spent in agony waiting for those test results. I'd remember the way she looked me in the eye and lied, over and over. She'd made her choices, and these were the consequences. I started seeing a therapist in April, working through the betrayal and the trust issues that now colored every interaction I had. It helped, talking to someone objective who didn't know either of us, who could help me process everything without judgment. My therapist told me it would take time to heal, that I shouldn't rush into anything new until I'd processed what happened, that I needed to rebuild my sense of self that had been shattered by Elena's lies. By June, I was starting to feel almost normal again, or at least a new version of normal. Oliver was thriving, doing amazingly well in his new daycare near my apartment. I'd established a routine that felt stable and good. Work, pick up Oliver, dinner together, bath time, bedtime stories. Simple, predictable, honest. Everything my marriage hadn't been. One Saturday in July, I was at Laurelhurst Park with Oliver when I met someone. Her name was Rachel. She was there with her niece, and we started talking while the kids played on the swings and the climbing structure. She was easy to talk to, funny with a genuineness that I hadn't realized I'd been missing. For the first time in months, I felt something other than anger or sadness or that hollow emptiness that had become so familiar. We exchanged numbers, went for coffee the next week while Oliver was at Elena's, one of the rare visits that actually happened. By our third date, sitting at a small Italian restaurant in Northwest Portland, she asked about my past. Why a young single dad was navigating the dating world. I gave her the abbreviated version, told her I'd recently gotten divorced, that it had been complicated. It's a long story, I said. Maybe someday I'll tell you the whole thing. She smiled, reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I'll be here when you're ready. Driving home that night, windows down, summer air filling the car, I realized something important. I'd trusted my instincts about Isabella, about Elena, about everything. And even though it destroyed my marriage and turned my life upside down, it also saved me from living a lie. It saved me from spending years, maybe decades, raising someone else's child while my wife carried on with her deception. I had Oliver. I had my integrity. I had the truth. And slowly, piece by piece, I was building a new life that was mine, one based on honesty rather than lies. Elena was stuck in a loveless situation with a man she didn't want to be with, seeing her real son maybe twice a month, living every day with the consequences of one drunken mistake that had cost her everything. That had to count for something. Justice doesn't always come from courts or lawyers or custody agreements. Sometimes it comes from life itself, from the universe balancing the scales in its own way. Elena got exactly what she deserved, a life she didn't want, with a man she didn't love, having lost the family she'd destroyed with her own hands. And me? I got Oliver. I got my truth, and I got a second chance to build something real. That's worth everything. If this story enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell for more real stories.